to one and all. On behalf of the executives, management, and staff of Al Baraka Bank, it is indeed an honor and a pleasure for Al Baraka Bank to host the relaunch of the Association of Muslim Accountants and Lawyers, AMAL, at our new regional offices here in Rosebank this afternoon. For all those who do not know me, my name is Muhammad Darabai. I'm the Relationship Manager of the Gauteng Professional Office. I will be your Program Director for this afternoon's program. Just a bit of housekeeping. Can I please ask you to switch your cell phones to silent? And if anybody needs the bathrooms, it's out through this door, straight to the end, and you'll see there's some signage there. I also would like you to take note that this event is being carried live on Instagram and live on Radio Islam International. We will commence with a brief recital of the Holy Quran by Brother Adil Duda, who is our Relationship Manager at the Gauteng Corporate Office. Adil.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين.
Jazakallah, Brother Adil, for that beautiful rendition from the Holy Quran. The program for this afternoon is as follows. Firstly, there will be a talk by the Chairman of AMAL South Africa and the CEO of Al Baraka Bank, Mr. Shabir Chouhan. It will then be followed by a presentation by Dr. Arif Ismail, who is the head of FinTech at the South African Reserve Bank. The third presentation will be by Mufti Zakaria Pando, who is the head Mufti at Darul Ifta at the Jamiatul Ulama South Africa. And the fourth item will be a 10-minute Q&A hosted by Maulana Habib Bobat. Our first speaker will be Shabir Chouhan, but let me just do a quick introduction. Shabir Chouhan worked at Coopers & Lybrand, and now PricewaterhouseCoopers in Durban and London. He's qualified as a CA in January 1990, was the financial manager at the Bangkok Group, served as finance executive and chief executive of Itala Development Finance Corporation, currently chief executive of Al Baraka Bank Limited South Africa from December 2004 to current, and he is also the current chairman of the Association of Muslim Accountants and Lawyers. It is my pleasure to call on Shabir Chouhan to address us.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like to welcome everyone and thank you very much for attending. I must thank our guest, Dr. Arif. Managed to track him down and to give us his date for this presentation, and also Mufti Zakaria Pando. I'm going to be addressing you in two capacities. The one is as the chairman of AMAL, Association of Muslim Accountants and Lawyers, and the second is as the CEO of the bank. I think from the AMAL side, I must first start off with, we want to launch AMAL in the Gauteng region in Johannesburg. And I must first just pay tribute to the Muslim Lawyers Association. I did have a chat with Yosha Tayyub, and AMAL's kind of functions is going to complement what the MLA is doing, but it's on a very different basis. I think it's very important to work as professionals. The impact of professionals in the economy is quite significant, especially from the Muslim community. And I think for this reason, we thought that let's launch something so that the professionals can work together. There are very specific issues affecting the Muslim community, and I think it's important that we advance these matters and also lobby for them going forward. AMAL, although it's Association of Muslim Accountants and Lawyers, is actually open to everyone. In fact, in Durban, we've got members who are not of the Islamic faith. So just a background to AMAL, it was established in 1980 by some very dedicated and committed members who had a vision. If you have a look at it, those members were responsible for actually establishing Islamic banking in the country. When I had a word with Zainul Kaji from OCAF, he showed me some documentation when those members created AMAL at that point in time, they were looking at how do they advance Islamic banking, how do you take Islamic economics, and for that reason, I think AMAL has played an important part in that regard. So the seeds were planted at that stage. Is AMAL elitist? Is it okay to have an organization just for Muslims? Are we going to be criticized for this? I think not, and I'll give you the specific reasons for that. There's so many issues affecting just the Muslim community. If you go to the Income Tax Act, and if the accountants and lawyers, if you haven't read it, Section 24J of the Income Tax Act has got a section relating to Sharia-compliant finance instruments. It talks about sukuks, it talks about muraba, it talks about musharaka. This is in the South African Income Tax Act. And the role that people have played to get it in there is quite significant. Section 8 of the VAT Act also talks about Islamic banking. The Transfer Duty Act, you'll be surprised to find references to that. The FASE Act, which is now FISCA, Financial Sector Conduct Authority, or whatever the term is, there's a dispensation for the deduction of impermissible income on unit trust. It's because of the lobbying that has taken place that has resulted in that, such that when people go and buy unit trust. So I'm saying there's quite a lot of work that needs to be done in order to make sure as Muslims our financial transactions are done in a Sharia manner, or to the extent that it can be done. Muslim marriage bill, it's a bit disappointing after 20 years. I don't think we're anywhere near the completion of this. So AMAL's responsibility is also to kind of go and get involved and see how we can advance this matter forward. You know, kind of recently there was a court case on that. The next issue is Islamic insurance. Yes, there is takaful via Bright, but there's a significant amount of legislation that needs to be enacted to get takaful onto the table. In fact, yesterday I was at the Reserve Bank, raised the issue with them, not for us, but for another service provider, and they're very keen to advance this matter. And in fact, they're actually setting up meetings for me with the financial or the conduct authority to have a look at this. So I think when you have a look at that, AMAL is very relevant, is very important, especially as professionals. How do we advance this matter forward? So the objectives of AMAL is basically, I don't think there's an organization that has accountants and lawyers together, or I'm not aware of it. And to bring the both professionals together, or the both professions together, will result in creating more opportunities for clients, for people to think things about differently, etc. So the whole objective is to assist and encourage professionals to develop and understand Islamic ethos in practices, in administration, to promote ethics, to promote morality, and that's something that's very important in our country at the moment. So the whole issue of teaching Islamic jurisprudence and the application thereof is one of the fundamental objectives of AMAL. And definitely it's the whole networking in this regard. So what has AMAL achieved over the years? We've got a full-time office in Durban, manned by a secretariat. We've got an exco. There's 12 members on the exco. We're planning to expand in various parts of the country. We've just launched a chapter in Pietermaritzburg about 2 or 3 weeks ago. This is the next launch up in Johannesburg. There's a number of Islamic banking conferences we held. I know even when I was not a member of AMAL, I joined conferences that took place in Durban, 2 or 3. Mufti Taqi Osmani, who is the senior leader in this field, he attended a week's program in Durban at some stage to talk about interest, to talk about Islamic economics. AMAL is also very responsible for outreach programs, actually going out, very well done in Durban, where they go out on a Saturday, members giving up the time, and making people aware for free on tax matters, accounting matters, and anything related in that area. I think it's so important to actually go and give back to the community. We have to play a bigger role in South Africa to make sure people understand this kind of issues, share skills, go and talk about small businesses, legal advice. In fact, next week, the team from AMAL is going to be at the Chaswood Center on a Saturday morning. And hopefully, if we get a chapter going up here that's active, to also do something similar. And also to indicate to the politicians that the community is involved in these matters, not just the charity, but also uplifting people. We had presentations by Yasmin Suleiman on tax updates. In April, we had Dr. Arif Ismail that came across and spoke about FinTech. It was 130, 140 people attended. We had functions to recognize graduates, and we're also getting financial advisors to speak to them, how they must plan for their retirement, how they must plan for savings on a Sharia-compliant way. An NPO workshop. We had people coming from the respective department that came and spoke at the NPO workshop. The CEO of the Tax Ombud was down in Durban a couple of weeks ago. Poppy. The Muslim marriage bill is very topical at this point in time. And we had a Saturday morning session to go through what is the next step for this. Why haven't we made progress for the last 20 years on this matter? There's various views on this matter, but as a Muslim community, we got to make sure that we're advancing this matter and we're getting it formalized. When we launched the Pietermaritzburg chapter a couple of weeks ago, we had an address by the president of the Law Society, Asif Isa. And he spoke about the Legal Practice Bill or the Legal Practice Act. It was surprising how many attorneys didn't know the details, the implications of it. He gave a fantastic 40-minute presentation on the implications, and it was 2 days before the act became kind of applicable. And in that 40 minutes, when I started speaking to some of my legal friends, I actually gave them some information about Section 78, the kind of fidelity fund. And it was really, really interesting, and I'm sure maybe you've had similar issues out here. On the 1st of December, we're having a program in Pietermaritzburg, our first event on NGOs. Future events is going to include mediation and arbitration, which is very relevant. Mohammed Isak, who is an expert in this field, is going to make a presentation. We're also going to get Asif Isa back to address the lawyers and also talk about succession planning. One of the issues that we're going to do in Johannesburg, there's a lady by the name of Adila Chauhan, not spelled, my Chauhan is C-H-O-W-A-N. This is a CA. She's now writing exams to become a lawyer. Single-handedly brought one of the big corporate CEOs down, Mark Lambetti, when she had this kind of issues. I tried to kind of get her to come out here, but she's writing an exam on Tuesday to come and talk about exactly what actually happened, what was the whole kind of issue. And it's going to be a learning case for us. But inshallah, that will be one of the events that we're going to talk about. So the way forward, we've got a website, amal.co.za. We've got a Twitter account, Amal SA, Facebook account. We want to form a chapter in Johannesburg. I've got one volunteer so far. I must recognize him. Farid, you're hiding, huh? Farid Jassat, who is a lawyer, and he's agreed, he's also a member of AMAL. But if there's anyone else that can help us out, I don't think there's too much of admin work. It's just that when we're hosting kind of functions to come across and to be the face of AMAL chapter. So I think we'll get you to also join at some stage. And we need volunteers. So I think to join AMAL is 100 rands for the year. There's membership forms. Please, let's make a difference and let's take this organization to the next level. The 100 rands, if you pay now, it also includes your 2019 subscription. So I'm not going to be like Saika. I heard the CEO on Saika on a podcast the other day. I'm sorry, we've got members of Saika out here. Found it trying to justify this whole position about not taking disciplinary action and going across and whatever. And end of it, what was the story? We're going to not increase fees, but we're going to charge you a 500 additional amount for a disciplinary levy. And I said, this is absolutely kind of ridiculous. Sorry, I know, to kind of listen to that kind of issues when they're not taking action at an appropriate time. But the 100 rands will also be for 2019. It's 100 rands a year, not a month or a week or something. So I think that's all. Please go onto the website. There is an online application form. Try to join. And if you can become members, we'll appreciate it. And it's open to everyone, not just accountants and lawyers. I'm taking out my cap as AMAL chairman. I can now put my cap on as CEO of Al Baraka. We are corporate sponsors to this event, so I think they've asked me to give a couple of minutes of talk on it. So welcome to our Al Baraka Gauteng regional office. This is our new office that we've got that complements the retail branch that we have opposite Hamleys. That's been opened, very convenient. I think, so we're looking for that support. But this office is so great. I was telling someone earlier, to come from Durban, jump on the cow train, leave home at 5 o'clock from Westville, and I'm in the office here at 7:45 in the morning. It's the most convenient place. Sometimes I think the people in Johannesburg, it takes them longer to get to work than me from Durban. I must also recognize our director Ahmed Lambat. Where are you, Ahmed? Ahmed, can you please stand? He's the director on the board. Ahmed, thank you very much for making time to come and attend. So we are a fully fledged commercial bank. We're part of the Al Baraka banking group based in 15 countries in the world. Got a balance sheet of $25 billion, 700 branches, 12,000 staff. I think the profit they made in the other year was $200 million. What's becoming quite significant, for example, in Turkey at the moment, because of the convenience of people going to Turkey, the visas are given you online. The number of people that are opening accounts in Turkey, and we're getting requests coming through, and we can facilitate those opening up of accounts. We are in 8 locations in South Africa. We've got an asset base of 6.7 billion rands, deposits of 6 billion, and our advances is 4.7 billion. So alhamdulillah, but we're a very small bank, 100% Sharia compliant, and we are growing, and we must thank the people for that. With regard to Forex, I think our Rosebank branch must be the most convenient place. Park at the bottom, go up the stairs, pick up your Forex, and you can leave. So we are doing some marketing on that. But very importantly, we recently issued a sukuk, which is an Islamic bond. It took us a couple million rands to get the documents done with one of the big legal firms. We got the Reserve Bank approval to get a 200 million rand sukuk Islamic bond about 2 years ago. It took us a long time to go through the process, but alhamdulillah, end of October, the 200 million rand sukuk, which is a tier 2 capital, was fully subscribed. And I think that's a great stride when you're having a look at the authorities allowing Islamic bonds to be implemented in the country. And I think that's another area where we as professionals can play a role to advance the Islamic economics and accounting. Full electronic banking, I think we know that. So please, Mohammed Darabai is here, your MC. Please try him out. He can be your personal banker. Won't pay another bank, which I also got an account, 500 rands to have a personal banking account. You can get it for free with Mohammed Darabai. So I think from our side, we're delighted to launch AMAL. Please join, please support the organization, and hopefully we can arrange for more talks and more functions. And on this basis, inshallah, we can take the organizations to greater heights. Shukran. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Jazakallah Shabir for that introduction to AMAL and highlighting the various ways on taking AMAL forward. Our next speaker is Dr. Arif Ismail. Our esteemed guest completed his doctorate in philosophy at the Gordon Institute of Business Science in 2016. He served as an executive at the Payment Association of South Africa, PRASA, in charge of strategy, research, and communication from 2008 to 2015. From May 2015 to August 2017, he was the divisional head of oversight at the South African Reserve Bank, and currently is the head of FinTech at the South African Reserve Bank. It is my pleasure to call on Dr. Arif Ismail to address us.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I hope you can hear me.
It's not on.
Is it not on? Let's try it again. It's not good being part of FinTech and you can't get the technology to work. Is it on? Okay. I can hear it now. It could just be the... Is it? Can you hear me? I think it's fine. Shabir, Jazakallah for having us once again. It's always great being part of these discussions. Very humbly, I would like to suggest that these discussions give us a sense as the central bank of where the public's minds are on various topics. The second thing that comes to mind, Uncle Rashid, is that it's always such a privilege coming to these sessions, and by absolute consequence, we get to see people that we haven't seen in a very long time. I haven't seen Uncle Rashid in over 20 years, and we have very warm memories of teaching in Islamic schools, and so on. As I listen to your thoughts, Shabir, I'm a little worried about the type of slides that I have. It might be very central bank focused and very technical. So I'm going to customize as I go along, if that's okay with you. Because I think I want you to get benefit from the slides and the thoughts, rather than it being a very central bank focused kind of set of ideas that I share with you. So maybe to get us fired up, and please bear with me, I'm going to do what fintechs do. Okay, they disrupt. So could I put you on the spot just for a minute or two And if you could share with me in a free way what you think FinTech is, just a few ideas. Don't be shy. I know in the Muslim community we tend to be shy. We don't want to speak up. All right. So if you could just shout out just anything that you think that FinTech is, whatever the idea is. It could just be a line. There we go. Accommodation? Or combination. A combination of finance and technology. All right. Okay. All right, to disrupt. I would always argue that, you know, technology and finance have always partnered together for years, right? If you just think of cards or checkbooks or the ability to do debit orders or EFTs, it's always been around, right? But I think what's shifting is the ability to use the technology to deliver finance, and we'll use some really interesting examples, to deliver a new way or new set of financial products and services. Give me a few examples of what comes to mind. Again, here? Yeah, peer-to-peer payment systems. Give me an example of one that strikes you. Bitcoin. All right. Bitcoin would be one example of a peer-to-peer platform, different from the past. We've never experienced anything like it. In fact, strangely enough, the paper was written 10 years to the month. It was put out by a gentleman called Satoshi Nakamoto, or people think that it was a gentleman called Satoshi Nakamoto. A paper placed online called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer exchange. 10 years ago. All right. Give me a few more examples that come to mind of FinTech.
So Alibaba Pay or something.
Yes, okay, so Alipay, very different from the type of products that we're familiar with maybe in South Africa. So the ability of paying someone else with your mobile phone whilst not having a bank account, all right? PayPal, yeah, PayPal. Would you think PayPal was disruptive? Yeah, absolutely. Which pilot project is that? Which one is that? All right, fantastic. That's another great example. All right, so I think there's a sense of what FinTech is about. It's the ability to combine technology with financial services, right? But the ability for those particular products or services to disrupt the current financial markets. Right, so the way that I'm going to do this is, I was sitting and thinking about this and thinking, this is probably a room full of lawyers and accountants, very intelligent people, highly critical people at the same time. And I thought, well, I'm going to share with you perhaps some insight in what goes on in a central banker's mind when they think about FinTech, etc. But I'm going to take the angle from a law perspective, and I'm going to take an angle from an accounting perspective. Okay, so here we go. The way that I'm going to do this is, and I think I've got about 20 odd minutes, so it should be enough. I'm just going to cover for you 4 areas. The first area is just going to be, so what is this FinTech? Okay, and you already have a sense of that. And why is this phenomenon important for us? What's changed? There's a famous economist, he wrote, this time is no different. It's the same thing. We've seen it over many, 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 many decades, many centuries. It's no different. I'm going to argue that it is different. I'm also going to argue, and forgive the technical terms again, that it's going to change. FinTech has the potential to change market structure. Market structure meaning the interrelation of companies in a financial services value chain who are dependent on each other and who are dependent on creating profit through that value chain. I will argue that it changes the composition of the market, it changes the concentration in the market, and it changes the competition in the market. And then I'll kind of refine what we mean by FinTech. The thing that I'd like to maybe latch on to in the second part is probably what Mufti will talk to you about under Bitcoin and a perspective from an Islamic point of view. What I'd like to do is talk about the consequences of FinTech, so not Bitcoin in particular, but talk about the consequences of FinTech around, so what are the benefits of this thing, of this phenomenon, and how does the central bank think about that? And then, of course, we can't help it, that's what we're here for. As central banks, we have to think about the vulnerabilities. We have to think about the risks, typically financial risks, as well as operational risks. Okay, and then one part of our job as a central bank is to think about the impact, not just of individual products and services, but their collective impact on the financial stability of the financial system in South Africa and globally. And then lastly, if I have some time, I'll give you a sense of what central bankers have committed to under the G20 on issues that merit attention from central bankers. Is that okay? Does that give you a warm feeling? Hopefully it's not too boring. I see some smiles, so here we go. All right, so I'm going to skip this one and maybe go to why FinTech matters. So I think the reasons well captured is that, I think FinTech matters because every single thing that we've ever been accustomed to, whether that's I need to drive a car to get to some other place, oh boy, I can now take Uber. Okay, every single thing that we've ever had, every service that we've consumed, including financial services, is going to be reimagined. So here's a quote from the CEO of JP Morgan Chase, and he said in 2015 to his report to shareholders, he said, Silicon Valley is coming. There are hundreds, thousands now of startups with lots of brains and lots of money working on various alternatives to traditional banking. And it's not just about payment systems. The example that he used in his report was one of online peer-to-peer lending. And he said, if you think of companies like Prosper in the UK and Lending Club, these companies can offer you a loan in a matter of minutes, sometimes 7 minutes. And how do they do that differently from the traditional banks? They don't just credit score you based on the traditional way of credit scoring. They look at all kinds of other data that's now become available. They look at things like social media feeds, who you're talking to, your LinkedIn profile, your Facebook profile. Okay, Shabir and I were talking about it a little. These digital platforms have the ability of tapping into the behavior of consumers to understand how they think about something, and then they manage the service offering that they have for you. So my core argument is, I think everything that we've ever had is going to be reimagined. And I'm going to give you examples of it, including the pilot that we run, for how would that change legally and from an accounting perspective. Right, so here's some tech, okay, just to clear up the noise and the clutter. Here's some tech on the left-hand side, and as the central bank, we're quite clear that we don't mix up the tech with the financial services innovation. It tends to get mixed up. When you ask people about what do you mean by FinTech, even inside a central bank, they'll use particular terminology. They'll use terminology like this as an example. They'll say to you, oh, hold on, by FinTech we mean the following. We mean application programming interfaces, APIs. Okay, what does that mean in simple English? The ability for some system to connect to some other system seamlessly. Okay, Alipay in China uses that. All right, they allow people to connect. In fact, let me use a better example. How many of you have iPhones? Okay. You'll notice that in their development, they didn't develop the apps. They left that to the market to develop. They just created the platform for it. And that's what APIs give you. Artificial intelligence, you familiar with this one? Okay, so the ability for the computers to learn and make some decisions and help you along. Okay, a good example of it is, you need to hold on to your chair, Mufti, you can close your ears for this one. Okay, I'm a Liverpool supporter. All right, so what typically happens is, I search for results on Liverpool. Okay? What does the API do in the background? It figures out, hold on, this bugger likes Liverpool. Okay? Every news feed on Liverpool, whatever Klopp says, Klopp, okay, whatever he says, off it comes into my pushed mobile app. And it says, hey, do you want to know about this? Do you want to know about that? Okay? Big data analytics, a huge opportunity. So people are now beginning to talk about, and the ladies will enjoy this one. I'm sorry if this sounds sexist. The fridge is now able to make some orders, okay, by having sensors in it. And that's what big data analytics gives you. I'm going to probably run out of time, so I'm going to go through it quite quickly. So here are some technologies that people are beginning to talk about. Okay, the one that has revolutionized the way we think of handling ledgers is cryptography and distributed ledger technology. Okay, so for the accountants in the room, just spend a second thinking about this. When you put your money in a bank, like our Baraka bank, it sits on their balance sheet. You know that the accounting is being held in Al Baraka Bank. The liabilities, and Shabir talked about the deposits, right, that he has. The liabilities sit on his balance sheet, okay? With Bitcoin and Ethereum and so on, okay, you have to ask yourself, where does that value sit? Okay, and that value doesn't sit in a single ledger. It sits for the first time in our history in multiple databases. And what this technology gives you is just the ability to update those ledgers in a trustworthy manner, in a secure manner. All right? So here are some stuff on the left-hand side that we call FinTech inside the central bank. And these are the things that we keep close to, understanding how they may impact the left-hand side. Now, here's the interesting bit. These are the things that are being reimagined. There's digital payments and electronic and mobile money. You won't believe this. So India have now a solution that they've put in called Aadhaar many years ago for digital identity. And off the back of that, they've created something called a unified payments interface, or unified payments platform. And more than 1 billion people have now access to that particular platform. You can download an app from a bank. You don't even have to belong to that bank, and you can make money transfers. Just ponder on that from a legal and accounting perspective for a second. You can download an app from a competitor bank and be able to do it at a fraction of cents in our currency. Cross-border remittances. You can now do transactions cross-border in a matter of minutes, okay, in a matter of seconds. Right? And then, of course, there are peer-to-peer lending platforms. These haven't rapidly taken off in South Africa, but in some of the other jurisdictions in the world, they have rapidly taken off. An example of one which had failed in China, and that's why the Chinese authorities got involved quickly for something that they call internet finance, and I hope I pronounce it correctly, is a platform called Ezubao. Okay? It raised, probably, a few years ago, funds up to about $600 billion US and failed. Right? So on the one hand, you have these particular platforms that give you the ability to borrow money quickly. Right? But from a regulatory perspective, we look at it and we ask, well, what are the risks that are involved? And then, of course, you can now have crowdfunding platforms. So if you want to fund something, you can go to the crowd, and the crowd could then fund you. All right? And of course, you know, investments used to be the domain of highly skilled brokers. You can now connect to a robo-advisor, and the robo-advisor will tell you, for $500, we think you should invest in X, Y, and Z. Of course, the reason why I've left cryptocurrencies at 7th is, whenever we talk about FinTech, there tends to be a tendency to quickly go down to Bitcoin and Ether and Litecoin and so on. It's just one form of innovation that's beginning to challenge financial services. The new stuff that's beginning to come out is that instead of taking insurance from an insurance company, you can have, over a platform, peer-to-peer insurance. Okay, the one that I'm cautious talking about, and it has something to do with the pilot, which I will talk about in a little bit of detail, is a central bank issued digital currency. So today you have cash. That's what you get from a central bank. It sits on our balance sheet as a liability. Could we possibly think, and central bankers are beginning to think about it, could we possibly think about an electronic form of that cash? Okay? Issued directly by the central bank. And what would that mean? Right? And then, of course, there's digital identity. So hopefully this gives you a feel for the difference between the tech and the application of the tech to financial services. Okay? Can I pause there and maybe just reflect on any questions that you may have? And then I'll take you through some pros, some cons, and what we're focusing on as a group of regulators across the world. Sure. That's a difficult one. Strangely enough, most people would think that it's cryptocurrencies, right? And meaning private cryptocurrencies. And that's simply not true. If you look at just its volume and value against fiat currency globally, it's extremely tiny. In fact, I would say that it has very limited stability implications. And we've kind of agreed that at the G20, that the implications are very low. The one that worries me, and I'll have to quantify it very quickly, right? I think a lot of these have positive impacts on society. They have big impacts on social welfare. They reduce the cost of transactions. They make the processing of it faster. I think the one that we've got to be very careful of as central banks is one called central bank issued digital currency. And the reason for that is, and maybe it's a good time for me to talk about Project Coca, right? So about 10 months back, we said to governors, we think that these technologies could have the ability to impact financial market infrastructure. So financial market infrastructure is typically centralized infrastructure like payment systems, Visa, MasterCard, Banks of Africa in South Africa, right? As well as other platforms like when you do processing of shares, right? Equities, bonds, and so on. You have a centralized operator in this country called Straight. And we think that these technologies might impact those particular financial market infrastructures. One of them is actually run by the central bank. Okay, in fact, it's such an important payment system, few people actually know about it. Right? It's a system called SAMOS, the South African Multiple Operating System. And believe it or not, if you take all transactions that happen in payments every day, right? Take your credit card, your debit cards, debit orders, internet payments, salary payments, checks, and so on. The total value of those transactions the total value of those transactions every day, total value of those transactions, just make up 7% of what actually gets processed in the economy. Then you have to ask, what's the other 93 or 92%? That's everything that goes through SAMOS. So banks, when they move money, getting all the terms wrong today, when they move money between each other, they do it only in SAMOS. So every transaction that's over 5 million rand can't go through these switches that I've just described. They have to go through SAMOS. And we said to governors, we said to them, we think that these technologies might actually impact on these financial market infrastructures. In other words, you may not need a centralized entity like SAMOS in the long run any longer. The banks between themselves would be able to process these transactions, still in an interoperable manner. And what we said to them is, give us the opportunity of experimenting with this. So to give you a feel for it, to build that system takes us about 5 years, because we're very careful about it. You can just imagine if a transaction over 5 million rand cannot be settled, right? The issue that it could have on the economy, right? To give you a feel for it, we process about 350 billion rand, okay, in that 92% of the value every day through that system. So we then built what we call a central bank issued digital currency, a tokenized rand, to allow banks, and I'm just going to use the example, so you could have Baraka Bank on the one end, and you could have Standard Bank on the other end, and Nedbank and so on in the value chain. And what we would then do is issue them the tokens and say to them, all right, between you need to process these particular transactions without the central bank being involved. And how would we then think about that? So it's almost like a Bitcoin network, if you have to think about it. The only difference is maybe I must just grab that. That'll be easier. Ah, is it fine? Okay. So it gives us the ability of actually understanding how these payments will be processed between the banks, all of them being involved in the processing, while still maintaining the confidentiality and privacy between Baraka Bank and, let's say, Absa Bank. So this one worries me a great deal. And the reason for that is, I think it has huge impact on what we call the two-tiered banking structure between the central bank and commercial banks. And we have to think very carefully around whether we really want to issue this. I'm going to use a quick example on this. So in Sweden, believe it or not, for you to pay in cash is very difficult. For those of you who've been to Sweden, you'll realize how difficult it is. Everything is electronic. So the Swedish central bank, the Riksbank, is now sitting back and saying, well, what does this mean for society if people no longer are paying in cash? Okay? And you're completely dependent on the services that are being offered by the private sector. What could this mean in the long run? So I would think that central bank issued digital currency is the one we've got to be very careful of as we go forward. It has lots of potential for things like deepening financial inclusion, etc., but it also equally has potential to really disrupt, okay, as FinTech does, the commercial banking sector. All right. Any other question, and then I'll rapidly fly through. Later. All right. So, so here's my take on it. I think these particular FinTech phenomena is going to change the market structure. I'm probably running out of time, so let me quickly run through these. I'm just going to give you a sense of the benefits and maybe the risks. So here's some benefits that we think might come from FinTech innovations, whatever that might be, including things like crypto assets and so on. First one is what we call decentralization and diversification. So in other words, you're no longer dependent on a centralized entity in order to process things. You can do it in a decentralized manner. The diversification is you're no longer dependent on just a set of systems. You also have now a broader set of systems. It certainly, as some of you have pointed out, can improve the efficiency of those systems, cost, time, quality, risk, and so on. And of course, it can improve the transparency of these transactions that are being processed. Just imagine for a second, right, that you're doing all of these transactions using eCash as an example, and you know exactly who you've paid, when you've paid, why you've paid them, just the transparency that could come out of that. And of course, the one that Shabir was talking about often is greater access for the larger community to these particular systems. So we do think that these FinTech innovations that we're seeing could bring large benefits, and of course, they could have direct positive impact on financial stability. But of course, you know, there are things that we have to be very careful of. And forgive me if this sounds extremely technical. I'll go for the bottom ones first. So some of the things that we have to be very careful of is, so what are the decision-making processes? So who determines that, for example, Bitcoin has a cap of 21 million or 22 million? How do you know when a particular asset forks and gives you Bitcoin Cash versus Bitcoin legacy? Okay, what are the cyber risks that are involved? I could quote you for the next half an hour a string of examples that have come out from FinTech innovations. I've quoted the one on Ezubao, which is the peer-to-peer lending platform, and the Japanese are terrified, as an example, of some of the things that they're experiencing over the crypto exchanges. There's just been a few more hacked over the last 1 month. Then, one of the things we are concerned about is third-party reliance. So more and more people are taking their solutions and placing them in the cloud with the likes of Amazon and so on. What are the risks involved on that? And then, of course, from a legal perspective, how do you define some of these things? In fact, Mufti will share some ideas just now. If you just take crypto, you know, our governor likes to call it things. He doesn't like to call it currency. If you just take that, just amongst a set of regulators, locally and globally, is it an asset? Is it a commodity? Is it a payment instrument? Is it a remittance? Okay? How do you define these particular things? They don't neatly fit with the regulatory frameworks that we've been used to. And then, of course, the business risks that I described from centralized providers. So if I have to summarize it, I would say to you, and I'm just going to go to the last slide. I'll skip all of these on account of time. I think, you know, what we like to create for governors is a sense of, so how do these things come together? And the first question they ask us is, will these FinTech innovations impact financial stability? Meaning the stability of institutions, the stability of assets in the market, money, and so on. And for now, we categorically state that the FinTech innovations that I've described, okay, do not have an impact negatively on financial stability at this stage. Okay, and the reason for that is, if we look at the benefits and we look at the risks, we think we're monitoring extremely closely. We think they've been managed. But the important bit is the one that I skipped out in the last slide. What are those things that could amplify the risks? And the things that could amplify the risks are things that we've learned from the financial crisis is contagion, interconnectedness. So if you think, and I'm sorry for the technicality, if you think of credit default swaps in the over-the-counter derivatives market, it wasn't just happening between two parties. Okay? That risk spread through what they call an originate-to-distribute model to other entities. So we've got to be very careful about that. The other one that the bankers will know pretty well is called procyclicality. And that technical term simply means you lend, for example, when it's good times, and you don't lend when you're in economic downtimes. We've got to watch that. We've got to watch excess volatility. Okay, so as an example, if you think of, I'm sorry for picking on Bitcoin again, but that volatility can have positive impacts, but it can also have negative impacts. When the price rises very quickly, people say, oh, I want to get onto that. They call it FOMO, you'll know that, the fear of missing out. Everybody wants to get on and say, I want to make some money. Okay, and if it's too good to be true, my dad always says, you must be careful. And then, of course, is it systemically important? What happens when Alipay grows to the point where it's the largest money market fund in China? What does the government think about that from a systemically important perspective? So I'd like to leave you with the thought, okay, that the way that we're now going to do this in South Africa is we've convinced the governors that we're going to create something in South Africa called an innovation hub, or sometimes they call it sandboxes. And what we're going to do is, instead of the regulator keeping at a large distance from the innovation, as has been typical in the past, we're going to come a lot closer to the innovation. So we welcome incumbents, banks, insurance firms, and so on, as well as fintech firms, to come and talk to the regulator. Describe the innovation that you're doing, and we will gladly, okay, in inverted commas, provide regulatory guidance or advice. All right? And if it doesn't fit neatly with the regulation, we'll create the space in the sandbox for innovators to continue innovating while we think through the regulatory framework. So maybe that's the thought that I'd like to leave you with. I'm hoping that that's the structure the FinTech unit inside the SARB can create within the next 6 months. And I'm hoping maybe the next time we meet, we can share with you that those structures are live and helping South Africa towards becoming a lot more innovative and open to ideas that may be disruptive. I'll stop there. Okay. Oh, sorry. You wanted me to, yeah. You wanted me to just share the, so I hope it works. Nope. Can you skip it for me? If you just click it? No? Is it stuck? Not great when the technology doesn't work. Ah, there you go. So this is just an example. This is just an example of what Project Coca looked like, right? So if you think of the ability of moving 350 billion rand, okay, a day, just amongst banks without the central bank actually being involved, we can still see the transactions. This is kind of what it looked like. So a lot of people say, nah, this blockchain stuff, you know, is not real. We've demonstrated just this stuff that you see on the left-hand side. That's the network that we used. We used Ethereum as a platform, or Quorum to be more precise. And for each of these things that you see here, these are transactions that are actually going through between the banks. Now the amazing thing is, all of them have to verify those particular transactions. Okay? They all have to get involved verifying it. But it's only a transaction between Baraka and Absa, yet they don't know the details of that transaction. And you ask yourself, how the hell is that possible? Okay? The technology has advanced to such an extent, and again, forgive me for the technical terminology, there are techniques that are used in cryptography called, for example, Pedersen commitments. You can submit the transaction, you can verify and validate it, but nobody knows in the background what the detail of it is. They also use something, and somebody talked about Turkey, they also use a technique in the background for processing, for checking that it's a valid transaction, called Istanbul Byzantine fault tolerances, which is a famous thing in cryptography. So this just gives you a feel that this is real. This was about 600, 800 people in the market in June, okay, sharing with governors what they've done between the banks on Project Coca to process these large value transactions without a central bank being involved. Okay.
Jazakallah, Dr. Ismail, for giving us a detailed insight into FinTech and the new disruptors, and also explanations into techs and finnovations. Before we call our next speaker, I'd just like to ask the two ladies if you could just come to the front so that we can make up some space. Okay, our next speaker is Mufti Zakaria Pando. Mufti Pando is the head Mufti at Darul Ifta at the Jamiatul Ulama. He is also the Ustad of Hadith Kitab and Fiqh at the Darul Ulum Azadwal. And it is my pleasure to call on Mufti Zakaria Pando to address us.
الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى أما بعد. قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد: أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر. صدق الله العظيم. I've started off with this blessed Quranic ayah, which we hear very often in the masajid. This ayah is such a comprehensive ayah with regards to our purpose in this world. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically says that you are the best of all nations. Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala further qualifies it and says why. It's because ukhrijat linnas, you have been taken out for the benefit of the entire human race, humankind. Which means our responsibility is to benefit the entire human race. We are not here to just benefit ourselves as Muslims, but we are here to see to the advancement and protection of the human race in all its capacities and all its facets, various facets. Allah Ta'ala further says, تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. And how will we achieve this is by enjoining the virtue and forbidding what is wrong and evil. So from this particular perspective, our deen is not only confined to acts of worship. As our jurists have always mentioned over the years, is that Rasul Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam came to guide the people in terms of their beliefs, in terms of acts of worship, in terms of family law and family life, public life, in terms of politics, siyasiyah, going in terms of our economic life, in terms of our spirituality. So the multiple facets that affect a human being, Islam is a leader and a role model for the entire humankind. And which comes to our point here, that we are also leader in terms of whatever our practices in terms of society, how we should be leading the people, what we should be doing and what we should not be doing. As such, Rasul Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam has stipulated important and core rules that basically govern this entire enterprise of Islam. So coming to the point with regards to the fact that Islam is still a day of Qiyamah, Rasul Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam is a Rasul for the entire human race from east to west, north to south, which means that because his Risala will remain till the day of Qiyamah, he will have to provide guidance for the entire human race till the day of Qiyamah. Intrinsically, this will mean that, which is a reality, that society progresses all along. When Rasul Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam came as a Rasul, it was after many, many centuries from the time Adam al-Islam came. And society has developed from the early Stone Age days to what was current in his time. And he provided guidance for whatever people were practicing at that point. And after the demise of Rasul Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam, you find life progressed, practices of people progressed in all the different fields. You find that they have moved on in terms of Aqidah, or they have moved on in terms of, for example, the spiritual practices, or in terms of economic practices, in terms of political practices, whatever. People move on. So Allah has created this within ourselves. But Rasul Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam provided some provisions by virtue of which we can basically measure the practices and qualify certain practices and disqualify certain practices. So in the field of economics, the same thing will apply. So Rasul Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam has set aside certain basic aspects with regards to, for example, trading. What is important in terms of trading? The first aspect is that it is something which is, it has to be mal, it has to be wealth. So coming to the point, the first aspect is this recognition of the evolution of society. This Islam recognizes. That is why it comes in a hadith. Rasul Kareem sallallahu alaihi wasallam has mentioned something to this effect. Al-Islamu ya'lu wa la yu'ala alayh. It is always above. It is not the other way around. Islam is above, always above the practices in others, providing guidance to the people all along. So you will find certain times, certain things are not allowed, and then you find the practices of people change, then eventually provided, very important, that it doesn't contravene the basic core values of Islam, you find those practices will have some legitimacy in Islam. So there are many practices. In the time of Rasul Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam also, you find the practices of muzara'ah that took place, which is of farming and sharing profits between the landowner and the farmer, or the person who's the cultivator, the laborer, they come to some agreement, and eventually they share their profits. Likewise, there are many practices like this. So, okay, anyway, so with regards to the, you find Rasul Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam has recognized this. Okay, we'll change it from there. Let's go on to the next slide. The one before this. Okay, look at, for example, the issue of permissibility of commission. This was now long afterwards. You find at one stage commission was not something recognized and it wasn't a practice in society. But as along it became a common practice, then you find the fuqaha have allowed for this because it became a public practice. But provided that it doesn't go against any core principles of economics. Going on to the next one, for example, you see sale of dogs, livestock semen, sale of dung and animal waste. There are multiple examples like this, where you find that people practices evolved, became widespread practices, and with the proviso it did not contravene any core important area of Islam, they find that it was permitted. Now we find ourselves on the cusp of the fourth industrial revolution. We find this technology going around. It has been started a while, digitization, distributive ledger technology and blockchain, cryptocurrencies, autonomous vehicles, 3D printing. There's many things happening. In fact, robotics have become a very, something becoming very common. In fact, there's a joke that a time will come where you find surgeons will not be needed. You find robots will do the same work. And the question comes in with ulama also, fuqaha also, people going onto the internet, they get all the answers. The question is that life is moving on. It's going towards digitization. And it's a new industrialization that comes about. The issue now is, well, let's focus on cryptocurrencies as well. So the issue here is we are looking at cryptocurrency. But before that, let's look at crypto assets or digital assets. Is there something recognized in Islam? Can we trade with this or not? All along, over the many centuries, when we trade with assets that are tangible. And now a time has come where we find we are trading with assets that are not even tangible. So the question is that allowed or not in principle? So here the same thing. Originally the fuqaha has mentioned before that mal is something, what is wealth, what is asset that can be used as a form of trade? And say the first thing is important to understand is that it's something where there's a desire for humans towards it. There's desirability, because mal is an Arabic word which comes from the root word mailun, which means to be attracted to something. So if people are attracted to something, then that is one sign to show that this can be classified as an asset that can be traded with in society. The second aspect is mal. Another angle of understanding the meaning of mal comes from the root word called tamawul, which means to be able to store, to hoard. So any asset that you find that people would want to acquire for themselves as a desire towards it, their needs can be fulfilled via it, it can be stored, then this is classified as mal. Now in terms of that definition, the early scholars made a distinction between tangibles and non-tangibles. But as the years went by, eras and centuries went by, you find the practice of people went beyond that. They went to non-tangibles. As a result, we find the aspects of gas, airtime, things like this has become so common in our society. And as an extension, digital assets. So you find a recording, it's digitized, it's being sold, money is being made, it's traded. So like this, there are many intangible assets that have become a source of an asset that is traded in society. Here are some examples of common intangibles. We can move on. So the point I'm proving is that it's not necessarily that an asset to be traded in business, it has to be tangible. It can go beyond that. So coming to cryptocurrencies, the issue is, why we have raised this issue is because some of the ulama, there is difference of opinion in this matter. Can they be traded or not? Is it asset or not? So keeping in mind those definitions, we understand that intangibility is not necessarily a requirement, or tangibility is not necessarily a requirement. You find SARS position, you find the European Union, Americans, etc. You find, although they may not consider it as a currency, in our SARS till around April, May, they haven't yet considered it as a currency. But is it an asset? They are considering whether you can charge taxes on it, the issue of whether you can be VAT on it or not. So they tell you that, in other words, there's a move towards accepting it as an asset. Whether it's a currency yet or not, that is something, there's a drive towards it. And you find governments around the world all working towards it. They realize that we have to move on, and we are going towards cryptocurrencies, crypto assets, and beyond that, cryptocurrencies. So in terms of cryptocurrencies, a currency, in Islam, you have two types of currencies. One is thaman al-khilqi, which is actually the natural type of currency, which is gold and silver. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also allows for us to have our own currencies. So for example, what is a currency? A medium of exchange. If you want to buy something, and I have something with my side, I want to use it as a form of exchange. If you are happy with it, it's sufficient. So as long as an agreement between two parties with regarding that medium of exchange, that's sufficient. It's a different matter altogether from a point of governance, whether the government want to consider it a legal tender or not, it's a different thing. But Islamically, there is leeway in that. So in conclusion, the issue of extent of acceptability of a cryptocurrency in light of Sharia, it is classified as some form of wealth, mal. But whether it's a currency, it depends on the state. But between people themselves, they can consider it a currency between their own transaction. Islam allows for that. But whether it's going to be accepted as a state currency or not, that depends on the government itself.
Jazakallah Mufti Pando for those insights into the Islamic perspectives on blockchain and cryptocurrency. And whilst we're waiting for the next item, which will be the Q&A, and I just want to and add on to what Shabir said earlier, and just tell you a little bit about Al-Baraka. Al-Baraka Bank Limited South Africa was established 30 years ago. It's owned both by local and international investors, with 62% owned by Al-Baraka Banking Group based in Bahrain. The bank has an internal Sharia department and an independent Sharia supervisory board, and is a member of the International Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions, also known as IOFI. The bank has a complete range of banking and financial services products, and I would like to take this opportunity to invite one and all to visit us or call us and let us explore how we can be your partner bank. The last segment of today's program will be a Q&A session hosted by Maulana Habib Bobat from Radio Islam. Maulana Bobat studied his Alim course at the Darul Uloom Zakaria from 2003 to 2010, and he currently is a presenter on Radio Islam since 2011. It's my pleasure to call on Habib Bobat to host the Q&A session.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If you've just joined us, listeners of Radio Islam International, it's just gone 6 minutes after 1, and we are coming to you live this afternoon from the Al-Baraka regional offices in Rosebank. We have a room full, packed with lawyers, accountants, and many others who are present here, and we are trying to understand the cryptocurrency, and also at the same time it's the launch of AMAL, Association of Muslim Accountants and Lawyers. It is the Q&A session, and just before this we had two presentations. The first one was done by Dr. Arif with regards to FinTech. Thereafter we had the presentation by Mufti Zakaria Pando speaking about Islam and cryptocurrencies. It is our last session. We're going to conclude in a few moments, but before that we've got a few questions to take. And if there's any other questions and follow-ups, you can also WhatsApp me on my personal number 07222 18384. That's for the audience that's listening over the airwaves of Radio Islam International on the various platforms on DSTV or audio streaming or on the satellite feed. 07222 You can forward your questions on this number, and hopefully I'll pose it to the panelists that are sitting here in front of me. Mufti Sahab, you spoke about common practices, and you spoke about that how a product previously was not acceptable, but because of common practice, it became acceptable. How do you recognize urf, or how do you recognize social concurrence? Because the world has become a global village. How do you determine a community, a society, or common practice in such a setup?
Okay, the fuqaha basically divide the practices of the people into two categories. One is a common practice of people. In other words, it's widespread across the entire country or in a major region of the Muslims.
Looks like we're having a number of technical glitches today. Batteries are low. So just to give you some perspective, we are actually speaking about cryptocurrencies, and we've got two panelists in front of us, Dr. Arif Ismail, and we've got Mufti Zakaria Pando of Jamiatul Ulama South Africa, the head of the department. And we are posing a few questions. We're just waiting for the mic to come through. And oh yes, then we'll be delayed again for myself.
Okay. The fuqaha basically divide the practices of the public into two categories. One is widespread practice of the public. In other words, it's common in the entire region, entire country, and that is called urful am. The other category or the other type is called urful khas, which means that it is of a specific, amongst a specific type of people. So for example, a practice amongst certain businessmen, that will be classified as urful khas. And then you find a practice that's common amongst everybody, not necessarily a particular type or group of people, that's called urful am. So Sharia basically recognizes this particular concept of urf. And if the practices of people change, then Sharia takes that into consideration. However, this kind of public practice is always going to be regulated by the core principles of Sharia. If it violates any of these core principles of Sharia, or a clear Quranic ayah, Quranic hadith, a clear hadith, prophetic narration of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, then that kind of a public practice can be disqualified.
So what will happen is that I'll pose one more question to Doctor, and then thereafter we'll open the floor for any questions. So if I could just have somebody to move the mic around, and if you could speak into the mic, because it's broadcasted live on airwaves on Radio Islam International. Dr. Arif, speaking about legislation and the framework. At the moment, we've got a few ATMs in Johannesburg and other parts of the country, and we see that there's a great traction for cryptos. What framework has the Reserve Bank created at the moment, number one? And number two, when we're speaking about SARS, does a filer have to add this in his gross income when he's filing for tax, or is it exempted? What is the current situation?
Great questions. So I think on the first one, what framework do we have in place? Maybe I can state the current position. So the current position is a 2014 position paper that was put out by the SARB. In fact, it was a joint position paper put out by SARB, National Treasury, the FIC, and at that time the FSB. And it's a very straightforward position. It says if you participate in cryptocurrencies, assets is the term we prefer, the risk is yours. So if there's volatility and you lose funds, you have no backing. How would that change, and would it change? So we've had a work group going between the National Treasury, the FICA, the SARB, and so on over the last 1 year, and that position is being reconsidered. Some of the things we'll think about are things like consumer protection. So what happens when you put your money into an exchange and then you want it out? What are the rules of the game? How long will you wait? What happens when there's a hack on the exchange? Who stands good for that liability? And those are some of the things that we're considering. I can state, though, that we've got a workshop coming up on the 26th of November for our initial consultation paper on a revised position. And some of the thoughts that we've shared is that we are definitive about a few things. This is certainly not legal tender. It's also not currency, not fiat currency at least, right? And we're tending to move towards more thinking of this as an asset or a token, and underlying that is the issue then of consumer and investor protection. The last thing is probably, there have been concerns around money laundering risks and so on. And I think those are the things that one would have to think about. The Bank for International Settlements, which is like the central bank of central banks, has also come out quite strongly describing this as a natural disaster. So for example, if you think of the amount of electricity that it takes to process these transactions, one has to ask back to the question of the overall good. Is this good for society? Then a short response on SARS. I think it would best be for SARS to respond at this stage. They do form part of the working group that we've structured, but I think I would be loath to comment on the position.
All right, is there any questions from the floor? Could we have the mic towards the back there, inshallah?
Dr. Arif, it's nice to talk about FinTech in terms of the first world and people have got access to banking facilities and everything else. But in South Africa, we've got a problem. We've got people that do not have bank accounts. How, from a Reserve Bank point of view, are you addressing the people from a financial literacy point of view to give them access? And I think that's the most important issue that's facing our country at this point in time.
Jazakallah Shabir. So that's an important question. I think no society can be happy and healthy unless its collective community are okay. I'll probably be bold and say, in my own understanding, my limited understanding of Nabi Kareem Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, I think his focus was always the poor, and those impoverished. So I think it's a very important question that you ask. I think in terms of what the central bank is doing about financial deepening or financial inclusion, it's not our direct mandate. And I know that sounds like a cop-out, right? Our mandate really is around two things. It's price stability of the rand and financial stability of institutions and financial market infrastructure. But because financial deepening is such a major issue in South Africa, we've opted in the payments vision that we've put out just this year to include a separate theme on financial inclusion. And just some of the ideas that we've been toying with are things like mobile money, e-wallets, okay, and things like digital identity, etc. Now, all of that needs to be driven not just by the central bank, but by a collective set of regulators and incumbents and fintech firms. So I think it's top of mind. And then, of course, the one that I kind of hinted at in the presentation is central bank issued digital currency. But again, the caution and the caveat on that one would be we have to tread very carefully to make sure that we don't solve one problem and create a whole lot of unintended consequences.
Okay, so thank you to Al Baraka Bank for hosting this seminar. A word which has been used a number of times is disruption, but perhaps maybe it's just us as human beings evolving. My question is to Mr. Johan, and we're talking of the word disruption, and just focusing on your bank. My question is, what is Al Baraka Bank bringing to the table in terms of disruption? I know it's on the spot. We're talking of cryptocurrencies, disruption. I would love to hear from you.
Okay, I think from the bank's point of view, worldwide, I normally attend a strategy meeting in Bahrain, and they're very conscious of this fact on the whole disruption side. So last year at our strategy meeting, they raised it. And this year in June or July, they had a session in Istanbul where all the different subsidiaries got together and they're basically mapping a fintech strategy to kind of move ahead. They're very conscious of it. They've got a plan over the next 1 year, 1.5 years to put just not fintech responding to customers, but across every single process, whether it's banking kind of related and non-banking related. So there is a plan in place. It will be wrong of me to kind of say right now what the plans are, but there is top of mind because we're kind of fully aware. Kind of fully aware of the disruption that this kind of causes. And yes, I think the banks that are not going to be doing it, They're going to be left behind now. Thank you.
Wow.
So, Dr. A question for you. What is SARB's position around peer-to-peer lending platforms in South Africa? And not specifically like individuals to individuals, but almost business to business, or individuals to business and vice versa.
All right. Before Dr. Sab, before Dr. Sab answers that, let's take another 2 questions one time so we can save on time there. Anybody else got a question there? Doctor, will just take note of that.
Mufti, just a quick question from my side. You spoke about that cryptocurrency is acceptable from a Sharia perspective, but the question that I've got is there's been such fluctuation in the value of cryptocurrency, Bitcoin or any of the others. How is it seen from an Islamic perspective? Because we've always been asked as accountants, is that not like lottery and gambling, etc., where you put in 1 rand, you take out 500,000 rand? So how is it seen from an Islamic perspective regarding that?
Jazakallah. Let's take one more question and then we'll ask our panelists to answer. There's a question here in front.
Yes. Is there any similarities with a Ponzi scheme? Other panelists can answer it. Thank you.
Jazakallah. We'll start with...
That's an easy one. Very rarely do you find central banks coming out and making strong statements about things. Governor Augusta Carstens is the one who's now responsible for the Bank of International Settlements, and he described it as exactly that. So I won't say too much more on that. Maybe on the online peer-to-peer lending and so on, what's the SARB's position on it? I think the easy answer to that is that we're not responsible directly for credit regulation. But what we are busy with is this intergovernmental FinTech working group that comprises a set of regulators. So it does comprise National Treasury, etc. The entity that we're trying to get to bring clarity to that particular question is the National Credit Regulator. So maybe the short answer on it would be watch the space, maybe in the next 6 months or so.
Okay, with regards to the question on the values that are fluctuating so aggressively, so this is the initial stage. Now, obviously, we have cryptocurrency is just the entity, the platform, and then you have the different brands, and Bitcoin is one of those brands. I suppose when there are more competition in the platform, then you find things do eventually stabilize. And also, something that's new because of demand and supply, you find naturally that frenzy do come about. I mean, any intangible asset, something that's new, will come about, and you find the prices may be very expensive. But eventually it does drop, and then it does stabilize in the market. So this also, like any other asset, tangible or intangible, you find that it will eventually stabilize. I cannot say necessarily that Bitcoin is a success or not. And I don't want to also focus specifically on Bitcoin. What I'm focusing on is the principle of cryptocurrency, and even governments are looking towards this. It's a reality, and people are moving. It's an AI world. People are going towards all that. And people are looking at alternatives. Yes, the banks are concerned for the fact that they have no control over the currency, as opposed to the fiat currencies. And whereas in a decentralized system, you find that they have no control and they lose control. So I think sometimes we hear that it's actually a tussle between the corporate banks on one hand trying to control it, and on the other hand, you find that the public, they want to have full control over it. In terms of the fiat currency itself, there's already quite a lot of consternation with regards to how governments are just printing fiat currencies, whereas it's not even backed by assets or the true assets of the sovereign assets of the state. So you find that this kind of tussle is going to happen. It's the starting phases of it. Eventually, it will come right. We have countries like, for example, Turkey, and you find Dubai also is talking about it as a country in Africa as well, looking at asset-backed currencies, cryptocurrencies. Now, if you're going to go that route, or gold-backed cryptocurrencies, if you're looking at that, then probably from that point of view, there may be definitely some security and some protection for the people who are basically trading with those currencies. Whether it's, the world is just going to stick to fiat currency itself, it's a matter of time. People are tired and fed up with just the fiat currency. They want to probably go on to the gold-backed currencies or the gold itself. So those kind of practices and demands are there in society. This is a matter of wait and see, as you say, that Brother Arif has mentioned. It's a matter of time in which the matters will really clarify.
All Right. Dr. Saab, also with regards to the cryptocurrency, it's just a comment, and perhaps you can enlighten me further. There is a reluctancy from the banking sector as well as the Reserve Bank to regard it as a currency, and as you correctly mentioned, that it's an asset. Is this perhaps to safeguard their interest in the fact that if you regard it as currency, then you've got no control over it? So at this moment, the safer route to classify it as an asset and no longer as a currency, because cryptocurrency essentially is decentralized. There is no, it's in blockchain as compared to a public ledger. So it's just a comment. Maybe you can add on to that.
It's a lovely comment. So I think, the topic of money and currencies is a really interesting one. We could probably go on for quite a while longer. So why do we hesitate to define this as a currency? I think the first starting point is that it is in a network, right? Decentralized and not owned by any single entity, right? So and that's why we call it private cryptocurrency. So or private crypto assets, right? But here are three, I think, reasons why we would battle to define it as a currency. So in terms of defining currency, we think of three things normally. We think of it as a store of value, right? So something that you put aside and it keeps its value. So a store of value, right? We think of it as a medium of exchange, right? So I can pass it on to you and so on for payments of goods and services. And it's also a unit of account. So you can set prices in it. So you pitch in a shop and they ask you, how much is this thing? You say 10 Rand. So immediately you can compare. That's what money does for us, right? Then you have to ask yourself, is it a good store of value? Is it a good store of value? Now, a good store of value would be one where you can trust that the value of that store of value doesn't fluctuate to such an extent that it has huge inflationary issues. Like in Zimbabwe, I go around the block, I come back, I want to buy a loaf of bread, it's now 10,000, whatever it might be. That's not a good store of value, right? Now, Bitcoin or cryptocurrencies, and more particularly in Bitcoin, exhibit those tendencies of very high volatility. So you have to ask yourself, why do you want to get a hold of it? And someone mentioned it, right? It's the desire to increase wealth very rapidly. That's the desire. Is it a good store of value? We'll critically argue as a central bank that it's not. Is it a good medium of exchange? How many of you pay in Bitcoins when you get to ShopRite Checkers and you buy your groceries? None. Okay? And then the last one is it a unit of account? And that's a fundamental one. So do you establish in the market prices based on that? You'll find some stores. Just to give you a quick feel, right? In South Africa, we have probably about 600,000 merchants. Worldwide, you get probably the acceptance of Bitcoin now, right, over 10 years, to about 150, 200,000 merchants in total. So we battle to define it as a currency.
Well, you can expect this kind of answer because it's coming from the Reserve Bank representative or person in FinTech. It just depends who you are speaking to when it comes to cryptocurrency. If you have a person who's pro-cryptocurrency, he'll give you, it is a store of value. It is a store of unit, and it is something that's desirable. The volatility exists in every market. In whichever field you enter, there will always be volatility, and that's why they speak about the aspect in Sharia called gharar. I don't want to get too technical, but just to say that it just depends who you are speaking to when it comes to crypto and these kind of currencies. Mufti Saab will take one more question, and then if there's any more questions on the floor, we'll take from there, inshallah, and we'll end off by 1:30, inshallah. In terms of zakat, I mean, as a businessman, we are obliged to fulfill our Sharia requirements also. How would the cryptocurrency work? Is it regarded as an asset or currency, and how do you calculate zakat on that?
Okay, with regards to it being an asset, I think there is some acceptance already that it's an asset like other digital assets. So if there is this acceptance, then if it's mal, so in this case here, if it's tradable wealth, as we're trading with it, then it's in this case it's going to be zakatable like any other trading wealth and assets. So we have a business and we have trading stock, so this becomes trading stock. For those who classify it as a form of currency, then they will pay it as a currency. So even without it being a trading stock, for the fact that it considered a currency, you're going to pay zakat on it. So like fiat currency as well. So the fact that we have cash lying at home, we're not trading with it, we're keeping it at home. So therefore, in this case, for the fact that it's got some value, here also it's got value, it's intended for purposes of as an exchange or a medium of exchange, so you pay zakat on that.
We'll take one more question, and by 1:30 we'll wrap up, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. A question for Dr. Arif. So it seems like the SARB has already come to a decision that it is going crypto. It is an asset, but the SEC has not yet made a decision on this. They're dragging their heels on this, and as doctors discussed, how we test for different criteria for whether something's an asset or currency. So SEC hasn't decided. Why is South Africa being so fast to take such a strong stance already?
Thank you for that. So I think the state in the United States is quite complex. So when you're looking at the SEC, you know, a lot of the stuff that they're thinking about are around commodities, and you saw the slide that was put up as an example. And they're also interested in things like ICOs, initial coin offerings. Now, if you look at their federated model, you'll find, for example, in New York, they treat it as a remittance, a payment instrument. Okay, so not even an asset or currency, just a payment instrument. Now, are we way ahead of the curve? The answer is no. I can assure you from the data that we see, there's a lot of people who have lost their money and a lot of people who cannot afford to lose that money. So how are we going about trying to address that? You know, we have been working on it, as I said, for about a year. We're keeping extremely close to the other jurisdictions. China, Japan, Singapore, Korea, the United States, the UK, and so on. And we're contrasting what we're coming up against what they've got. The bottom line, though, is that, you know, at this stage, I think I reiterate that there are no stability implications. So this doesn't impact the rand, doesn't impact monetary policy, right? What it does impact is consumer protection and investor protection. Now, that's the angle that we're going to take on it. All right. Again, we're in a consultative process. The public paper will probably come out anytime in the first quarter of next year. And I think we welcome comments from all and sundry, whether they're proponents or whether they are critics.
Jazakallah khairan. Well, those who are listening to us on Radio Islam International, it's just gone 1:30. It brings us to the end of our program today. We are broadcasting live from the regional offices of Al Baraka in Rosebank. And we say Jazakallah khairan to all those who are listening, as well as those who are attended here. There's one question left, and that is what's on the menu, and for that we've got Brother Muhammad Tarabai.
Jazakallah Maulana Habib for hosting the Q&A session. I trust that you all enjoyed the program today and taking the time to be with us this afternoon. In closing, we would like to say a special thanks to our special guest, Dr. Arif and Mufti Pando, and all of you. We also would like to thank all those involved in putting this event together, the marketing teams of Radio Islam International, Al Baraka Bank and AMAL, ITV, our facilities department, and our coordinators, Sumaya and Safwana. We wish you a pleasant journey home, and we wish to also say that we have to praise and thank Almighty Allah for having afforded us this opportunity to partake in this memorable event. And we make dua that Allah guides these organizations to even greater heights. I mean, snacks will be provided just outside, and salah facilities are provided just down the passage. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.